2 alien companion girls were assigned to work with me. I never expected what happened next. The hum of the space station's engines filled the air as Marcus stood in the main control room, staring at the mission briefing displayed on the hollow screen. His heart was pounding, not from the technical details of the task at hand, but from the strange assignment he had just been given. He had always worked in teams, but this time was different. This time, he would be working alongside 2 alien companions, 2 women who were as mysterious as they were different. Marcus had been chosen for his engineering expertise, but it wasn't just his skills that made him suitable for the job. The station was a high-tech facility at the edge of known space, housing an ancient alien artifact that had been uncovered on a distant, unexplored planet. The mission was clear: activate the artifact and unlock its secrets, but the details of its power and purpose were still unknown. It was a mission that could change the course of history if it worked and if they survived. The briefing ended with the arrival of his 2 new colleagues, Zara and Lyra. Marcus felt an uneasy sense of anticipation. He'd worked with aliens before, but never like this. Never with 2 women, each from completely different worlds. He had heard of Zara's species, telepathic beings who were often called the diplomats of the galaxy. They could communicate without speaking, their thoughts linking with others in a way that was both alien and fascinating. Zara's reputation as one of the most brilliant minds in her field preceded her, and she was said to be calm and methodical, a true asset for any mission. On the other hand, Lyra was the opposite in every way. From a race of powerful warriors known for their physical prowess, she was a striking figure with red skin and sharp, angular features. Unlike Zara, Lyra communicated mostly with her body. Her posture, her gestures, and her tone all carried meaning. She was direct, unrelenting, and had a reputation for being fiercely independent. She had earned the respect of many in her species, but she wasn't known for being easy to get along with. As the airlock door opened, Marcus could see them both standing there, Zara's silver skin almost glowing under the station's artificial lights, and Lyra's fiery appearance standing in stark contrast. Zara's calm, composed demeanor made her look ethereal, while Lyra's towering presence made it clear she was someone who could hold her ground in any situation. "Marcus, it's good to meet you," Zara said, her voice soft but clear. Her words didn't just reach his ears. They seemed to enter his mind, and he could sense a cool, collected intelligence behind them. Zara's eyes, a deep shade of violet, studied him as if she were reading his thoughts. Lyra, however, gave him a more physical greeting. She extended her hand firmly and nodded in acknowledgement. Her gaze was intense, though there was a hint of amusement in her eyes. "I'm Lyra. Let's see if you're as good as they say." Marcus took both their hands, feeling the weight of the situation settle in. Working with these 2 could be both a dream and a challenge. He had no doubt they were both incredibly capable, but their vastly different ways of operating could make for some interesting times ahead. The 3 of them made their way to the artifact room, where the ancient relic was stored. It was a large chamber with reinforced walls and a floor that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. The artifact itself was a massive crystalline structure, embedded in a pedestal of alien material that Marcus couldn't identify. It seemed to hum with an energy that was both eerie and mesmerizing. "We've been analyzing the artifact for weeks," Marcus began, his voice a little unsteady, "but we've yet to make any headway on what it actually does." Zara stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she studied the artifact. "It's a key, but to what?" she murmured to herself, her thoughts no longer just her own but touching Marcus's mind. He could feel the mental pulse, like a soft vibration, as if she were reaching out with her thoughts. Lyra, who had been standing a few steps back, crossed her arms over her chest. "We're wasting time if we stand here and guess. Let's activate it, see what happens." Marcus glanced between the 2 women. Zara was cautious, almost too cautious, while Lyra was the complete opposite. It was clear they were going to need to find a balance between the 2 of them if they were to succeed. But right now, it wasn't the tension between them that concerned Marcus. It was the artifact. "We don't know what will happen if we turn it on," Marcus said, his voice quieter now. "This thing could destroy the whole station, or it could open a doorway to something far worse." Zara tilted her head, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. "That is a possibility. But if we leave it alone, we may never understand what it truly is. We need to take the risk." Lyra gave a short laugh. "Of course we do. That's why we're here, right? To make the tough calls." There was something about Lyra's confidence that made Marcus uneasy. It wasn't arrogance. No, it was something deeper. A need to prove herself, perhaps. Or maybe it was simply the warrior instinct she carried with her. He couldn't tell, but he knew one thing for certain. When it came to Lyra, things were never simple. Marcus stepped forward, his heart racing as he approached the artifact. He placed his hand on the cool surface of the pedestal, feeling the faint vibrations ripple through his fingertips. He hesitated for a moment, glancing back at Zara and Lyra. Zara was watching him closely, her eyes never leaving the artifact. Lyra, however, had turned her gaze to the room's perimeter, as if anticipating trouble. "All right, here goes nothing," Marcus said, pressing the activation button. The instant he did, the room seemed to shift. The hum of the artifact grew louder, and the crystalline structure began to glow with a soft, pulsating light. For a moment, everything felt still, as if the world itself had paused. Then the energy exploded outward, sending waves of force rippling through the room. Marcus staggered back, his heart pounding in his chest. Zara's telepathic presence intensified, her thoughts mingling with his as she tried to analyze what had just happened. Lyra, ever the protector, immediately positioned herself between them and the artifact, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. The light from the artifact continued to pulse, but now it seemed less chaotic and more controlled. A steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. Marcus could feel the energy surrounding them, pushing and pulling at the edges of his mind. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice a whisper. Zara's voice came to him softly, her thoughts clear and focused. "It's opening a channel, a doorway, but to where?" Lyra's hands were tense at her sides. "If this is a trap, we need to be ready." Marcus could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on him. What had they just unleashed? And why had it chosen now, of all times, to reveal its power? Before anyone could speak further, the chamber's door slid open, and a series of alien symbols began to appear on the walls, glowing faintly. It was then that Marcus realized this was only the beginning. Whatever this artifact was, it was connected to something much larger, something far beyond their understanding. And the strange part, the connection he felt to Zara and Lyra seemed to deepen with each passing second. Their minds were more entwined than before, as if the artifact had linked them in some way. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but one thing was certain. This mission was about to become far more complicated than anyone had expected. The soft glow from the artifact filled the room, casting strange shadows across the walls. Marcus could feel the atmosphere shift. It was like the air itself had changed, thickened, as if something deep inside the station had come alive. The symbols on the walls flickered, their glow ebbing and flowing like the tide, their shapes unfamiliar and mysterious. Zara stood at the far end of the room, her violet eyes fixed on the artifact as if she were trying to decipher its secrets. Her telepathic presence was strong, almost overpowering, but it didn't feel invasive. Instead, it felt like a gentle push against the edges of his mind, a constant hum that made him aware of her every thought. Lyra, on the other hand, was anything but calm. She paced back and forth, her strong figure a constant movement in the room. Every few steps she stopped and glanced at the door, her hand resting on the hilt of the blade at her side. The tension in her posture spoke volumes. She was ready for anything, but there was something else too, something hidden beneath her readiness. Fear, maybe, or doubt. The air was thick with it. "This is wrong," Lyra finally said, breaking the silence. Her voice was low, almost a growl, as if she were speaking more to herself than to the others. "The artifact is changing. It's not what we thought it was." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Lyra was never the one to speak lightly. If she said something was wrong, it meant something was very wrong. He turned to Zara, hoping for some reassurance, but she was still deep in concentration, her eyes closed as if listening to something that he couldn't hear. Zara's voice came to him, soft and steady. "It's not what we expected, no, but it's not dangerous." "Not yet," her words were comforting, but the way they hung in the air felt like a warning. "It's a doorway, Marcus, a link to another place." Marcus frowned, his mind racing. "A doorway to where? What kind of place?" Zara's eyes opened, and for a moment Marcus felt as if she were looking right through him. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something darker behind her gaze. "I don't know yet, but we need to proceed with caution." Lyra scoffed, clearly not satisfied with Zara's calm response. "Caution," she repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. We don't have time for caution. If that thing's opening up a portal, then we need to close it before something worse happens. We don't even know who or what is on the other side. Marcus could see the tension building between them. Zara, the cool-headed diplomat, was always the one to think before acting. Lyra, the warrior, was ready to charge ahead without hesitation. It was a clash of personalities that had the potential to turn dangerous if not handled carefully. "You're right," Marcus said, stepping between the two women trying to defuse the situation. "But we need to know what we're dealing with first. If it's a doorway, then we need to understand it. Rushing in without understanding could make things worse." Lyra shot him a glance, her eyes narrowing. "You've been on this station for too long, Marcus. I'm telling you that thing's dangerous. We can't waste time waiting to see what happens." Before Marcus could respond, the room seemed to hum louder, as if the artifact itself were responding to their conversation. The air grew warmer, and the walls around them seemed to pulse with life. Then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. The tremor was light at first, like the station was simply shifting, but it quickly grew stronger, the vibrations intensifying. Marcus felt his stomach drop as the rumbling continued, and the glow from the artifact grew brighter, almost blinding. He reached out instinctively to steady himself against the pedestal. "Get away from the artifact!" Lyra shouted, her voice sharp with panic. She lunged forward, grabbing Marcus's arm and pulling him back. Zara, her telepathic focus breaking, turned to face them, her eyes wide with concern. "It's not the artifact," she said, her voice steady but with a trace of urgency. "It's something else. Something is coming." The tremor grew into a violent shake. The walls rattled, and the ceiling above them groaned, as if the station itself were being torn apart. Marcus could hear something else too, voices. Whispering, unintelligible voices that seemed to fill the room, bouncing off the walls like a million overlapping thoughts. His head began to spin, and for a moment he felt disoriented, as if he were caught in a dream. Then the whispers stopped, and the shaking ceased. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus blinked, trying to clear his head. The tremor had stopped, but the air felt thick, charged with energy. The glow from the artifact dimmed slightly, but the symbols on the walls continued to glow faintly. "Did you hear that?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. The room felt still, unnervingly so, as if they were waiting for something to happen. Zara nodded, her eyes scanning the room. "The voices were a warning. The artifact is connected to something older and more powerful than anything we've ever encountered. It's calling out, trying to reach us." Lyra's hand was still on the hilt of her blade, her body tense as she watched the door. "What is it calling out to? And what's going to happen next?" Marcus didn't have the answers, but he could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. He didn't understand what the artifact was or why it had started reacting this way, but one thing was certain: something was wrong. They were no longer in control. The artifact had begun to unravel something much bigger than any of them. "We need to figure out what's going on," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his mind. "The artifact is part of something much bigger, and we need to understand it before it's too late." Zara's eyes narrowed as she looked at the artifact once more. "It's connected to an ancient race," she said, her voice thoughtful. "One that disappeared long ago. They left behind these artifacts as a warning, but we don't know what they were warning us about. The voices, they're not from any race we know. They're ancient, forgotten." Lyra took a step forward, her boots thudding against the floor. "I don't care about ancient races or warnings. I care about what's coming through that portal, and I'm not waiting to find out." Marcus turned to face her, frustration rising in his chest. "Lyra, we don't even know what we're dealing with. We need to understand this before we act." But Lyra was already moving, her hand reaching for the activation switch. "I've had enough of waiting," she muttered under her breath. "If there's something dangerous coming, I'm going to stop it." Before Marcus could stop her, Lyra pressed the switch. The room erupted in a blinding flash of light. The walls seemed to bend and twist, and for a brief moment, Marcus felt like he was falling. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went still. The artifact's light dimmed and the voices faded into silence. The room was once again still, but the air felt heavier now, charged with an almost palpable tension. Marcus looked around, his heart racing. "What did you do?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. Lyra stood, breathing heavily, her eyes wide with something that was almost fear. "I don't know, but I think it started. The portal's open now, and we can't close it." Zara stepped forward, her eyes scanning the now silent room. "We've unleashed something," she said softly, "something that was never meant to be set free." Marcus felt his stomach tighten as the weight of her words settled in. They had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. The silence in the room was almost suffocating. The sudden quiet after the blinding flash of light left Marcus feeling uneasy, like he was waiting for something that had yet to happen. He stood frozen, his eyes locked on the artifact, which no longer glowed with its bright intensity. Instead, it pulsed softly, like the beating of a heart, sending waves of energy through the air. The symbols on the walls were still faintly glowing, but the eerie whispers had disappeared, leaving nothing but an unsettling stillness. Lyra was the first to break the silence. Her hand was still on the activation switch, her body tense and poised for action. "What now?" she asked, her voice steady but carrying an edge of uncertainty that was rare for her. She wasn't usually the one to second-guess herself, but whatever they had unleashed had made her question her usual confidence. Marcus glanced over at Zara, who had been eerily quiet since the artifact activated. Her violet eyes were closed, her body still, but there was a subtle tension in her posture, like she was listening to something only she could hear. Marcus had no doubt that she was processing everything at a deeper level than he could understand. The telepathic connection she had with the artifact made her more attuned to its energy than anyone else, but it also made her vulnerable to its influence. Zara opened her eyes slowly, meeting Marcus's gaze. "It started," she said, her voice calm but heavy with something Marcus couldn't quite place. "The artifact. It has opened the way, and now the energy is flowing. It's connecting to something, or someone." "Someone?" Lyra's tone was sharp, her hand still gripping the hilt of her weapon. "Is it another race? Are they coming through the portal?" Zara shook her head, her expression unreadable. "Not another race, something older, something forgotten." Marcus felt his stomach tighten at her words. He had feared this. The artifact was connected to something far beyond their understanding, and now it was reaching out to something that had been dormant for who knew how long. The fact that Zara couldn't identify it only made the situation worse. "Can we close it?" Marcus asked, his voice steady, though he could feel the growing anxiety inside him. He needed to know if there was still a way to stop whatever was happening. They had already made a dangerous mistake by activating the artifact, but was there still time to fix it? Zara hesitated for a moment before responding. "I don't know. The artifact is unlike anything I've encountered before. It's not just a key, it's a bridge. A connection to something deeper than any of us could understand." She took a deep breath. "If we try to close it, we risk destabilizing everything. We don't know what will happen if we disrupt the flow." Marcus turned toward Lyra, whose eyes were scanning the room as if she expected something, or someone, to appear at any moment. "So we just wait?" he asked. "Do nothing and hope that whatever's coming through doesn't destroy everything?" "I didn't say that," Zara replied, her voice firm. "We need to be careful, but we can't just ignore it either. The artifact is calling, and there's no telling who or what is responding." Lyra let out a low growl of frustration. "If you two are going to stand around and think about it, I'm going in." She turned on her heel and strode toward the pedestal, her boots thudding heavily against the floor. Her warrior instincts were kicking in, and Marcus could see the fire in her eyes. She was ready to charge into action, but he knew that this wasn't a situation that could be solved by brute force. "Lyra, stop!" Marcus shouted, moving quickly to intercept her. He grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "We need to think this through. We don't know what we're dealing with. Going in blind is a mistake." For a moment, Lyra's intense gaze locked onto his, her jaw clenched tight. Then, to his surprise, she released a heavy sigh and stepped back. "I know," she muttered. "I just hate waiting around. This is what I was trained for, dealing with threats, fighting for survival, but I guess this. This isn't a fight we can win with weapons." Zara nodded in agreement. "Exactly, this is something different. We need to understand it before we act. The artifact isn't just a tool, it's part of something much larger." Marcus felt a weight settle over him. They were standing at the edge of something far beyond their comprehension, and every choice they made from here on out could tip the balance in ways they couldn't foresee. Suddenly, the room shuddered, and the air seemed to grow colder. A strange energy began to swirl around the artifact, its pulse growing stronger. The symbols on the walls began to move, twisting and shifting in ways that defied logic. Marcus felt a rush of cold air brush past him, and he instinctively reached for the nearest wall to steady himself. His heart began to race. "It's here," Zara said softly, her eyes wide with realization. "The connection is active. Whatever was on the other side is reaching through." Lyra's hand went to her weapon again, but this time she didn't unsheath it. Instead, she kept it at her side, ready for whatever was about to happen. Her stance was defensive, but her expression betrayed a hint of fear. Marcus looked around the room, his mind racing. The air was thick, charged with energy, and the strange sensation of being watched weighed heavily on him. He could feel the pressure building, like something was watching them, waiting for the right moment to make its presence known. Then, without warning, the temperature in the room dropped sharply and the lights flickered. A low, rumbling noise echoed from the artifact, and the walls seemed to vibrate in response. Marcus could feel a deep pull, a magnetic force drawing him toward the pedestal. He took a step forward, instinctively reaching out, his hand hovering just above the artifact. "Don't touch it," Zara shouted, but her warning came too late. Marcus's fingers brushed against the cool surface of the pedestal, and immediately a surge of energy shot through his body, causing him to gasp and stumble back. The room spun around him, and he felt as though he were being torn between two realities. His vision blurred, and for a moment he saw flashes of alien landscapes, cities with towering spires, vast deserts under twin suns, oceans filled with strange creatures. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the images vanished, leaving Marcus dizzy and disoriented. Lyra reached out to steady him, her hand firm on his shoulder. "What the hell was that?" she demanded, her voice laced with both confusion and fear. "I don't know," Marcus replied, his voice shaky. "But I think we've connected with whatever is on the other side of the artifact." Zara moved closer, her eyes scanning the artifact with an intensity that sent a chill down Marcus's spine. "It's not just a connection," she whispered. "It's a link, a bond between us and whatever is waiting." A sudden flash of light erupted from the artifact, and a figure began to materialize in the center of the room. It was like watching a hologram come to life, but this figure was no projection. It was solid, real, an entity of light and shadow, with a form that seemed to shift and change with every heartbeat. The figure's eyes, if they could even be called eyes, were two glowing orbs filled with a deep, unnatural light. It gazed at them, its presence suffocating, as though it could see into their very souls. Marcus felt a rush of terror, but he also felt something else. A strange sense of connection, as if this entity had been expecting them, had known them for a long time. The figure spoke, but its voice wasn't heard through the air. It was inside their minds, a chorus of whispers that sent chills through their bodies. "I have been waiting." The figure before them pulsed with an otherworldly energy, its glowing eyes staring into each of them as if it could peer into their very souls. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in as the entity's presence seemed to grow larger, consuming the space around them. The air was thick with anticipation, and every breath Marcus took felt heavier than the last. Lyra instinctively tightened her grip on her weapon, her body poised for action, but she didn't move. Zara, on the other hand, stood frozen, her violet eyes locked onto the entity with a kind of eerie calmness. The tension in the room was palpable, and Marcus couldn't help but feel like they were teetering on the edge of something dangerous. The voice, a collection of whispers that reverberated in their minds, cut through the silence once more. "I have been waiting." Marcus felt a shiver run down his spine as the words echoed in his head. They weren't just spoken, they were felt, experienced. The entity didn't need to move or speak aloud for its message to reach them. It was as if its voice came from everywhere, surrounding them, enveloping them in its presence. "Waiting for what?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper, afraid that any louder sound would break the fragile moment. The entity's gaze shifted toward him, and for a brief moment the room seemed to grow colder. The whispers grew louder, more intense, filling his head with a rush of fragmented thoughts, memories, and images that weren't his own. It was overwhelming, like trying to comprehend 1,000 lifetimes all at once. "Waiting for the chosen, the ones who would open the gate," the entity replied, its voice now clearer though still a chorus of many. "The artifact was only a key, a conduit. You have opened the way." Lyra took a step forward, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Open the way to what? And what do you mean by chosen? We didn't choose this." The entity's form shifted slightly, its glow flickering as if amused by Lyra's challenge. You did not choose, but you were chosen. The artifact chose you. You are the ones who will bridge the divide. Marcus felt a surge of panic rising in his chest. Bridge the divide? He repeated, his voice trembling slightly. What does that mean? What are you? The figure paused, its glowing eyes flickering like distant stars. I am the last remnant of an ancient race, a race that once ruled this galaxy but whose power was shattered, their knowledge lost. You are standing at the precipice of a great shift. What you do next will determine the fate of not only this station, but of your entire world. The words hung in the air like a weight, pressing down on them all. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could feel the weight of the entity's presence in his bones, as if it was not only speaking to them, but to the very core of their existence. Zara finally spoke, her voice calm yet filled with an edge of uncertainty. So, the artifact, it wasn't just a tool. It was a test. The entity's form seemed to ripple, as though it were considering her question. Yes, the artifact was a test, a way of finding those who would be capable of unlocking what has been hidden. It was never meant to be opened by just anyone. You have proven yourselves, but there is more at stake now. The divide you have opened is the gateway to the return of my kind. Lyra stepped back, her brow furrowed. The return of your kind? Her voice held a hint of disbelief. So what? You're asking us to help you bring back a species that was destroyed. The entity's eyes glowed brighter, and the temperature in the room dropped again. My kind was destroyed because we sought too much. We were too powerful, too advanced. But there are those who remain, scattered across the universe. They are waking, and they will not forget the ones who opened the way. Marcus felt a cold sweat trickle down his back. He wasn't sure what to believe anymore. He had thought that activating the artifact would be a simple scientific task. Unlock its secrets, learn from it, maybe gain something valuable. But this was something far more complicated. The entity wasn't just a being, it was part of something much older, something that had been hidden for a reason. And what happens to us? Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the chaos brewing inside him. If we've opened this way, what do you want from us? The entity's gaze shifted again, and Marcus felt it, felt the weight of its gaze as if it was measuring him, testing him. You are the ones who will guide the path. You will choose whether to close the gate or to open it fully. The future of your species and many others depends on this choice. Lyra's grip on her weapon tightened. And what happens if we open it fully? The entity's form flickered again, and this time the temperature seemed to drop even further, like the very air was being sucked out of the room. Chaos, destruction, power beyond comprehension, the balance of the universe will be shattered. But the door will be open, and those who have been waiting will come. The words sent a shiver through Marcus, but at the same time he couldn't help but feel a strange pull. He was terrified, but also intrigued. There was power here, real, undeniable power. But was it worth the risk? We're not ready for this, Zara said softly, almost to herself. We don't even understand what we're dealing with. We've just unlocked something we can't control. The entity's presence seemed to grow stronger, as if it had heard her thoughts. You are ready. You have already crossed the threshold. The power is within you now. You cannot undo what has been done, but you can decide how to wield it. Lyra took a step forward, her eyes burning with determination. And what happens if we decide to close it? She asked, her voice firm. The entity's eyes dimmed, and the air grew thick with a palpable sense of finality. The power will remain dormant. The gate will close, and my kind will remain in the dark, but the choice is yours. Marcus felt the weight of the decision bearing down on him. This wasn't just about knowledge anymore. This was about survival, about the future of the galaxy and possibly his species. What do we do now? He asked, looking between Zara and Lyra. The decision felt like it was too big for any of them to make alone. Zara looked back at him, her expression unreadable. We don't have all the answers, but I think we need to understand more before we make a choice. Lyra snorted, clearly frustrated. We've already waited long enough. We know enough. The artifact has shown us what it can do. The question is whether we can stop it before it's too late. Marcus stood there, caught between the two of them. Zara was right. They needed more information. But Lyra's impatience was understandable. The entity's words were clear enough. They had opened the way. There was no going back. We can't rush into this, Marcus said, his voice firm. We need to know what we're dealing with first. If we're going to make a decision, we have to understand what we're actually facing. The entity seemed to consider his words, its glowing eyes flickering once more. Time is running out. The door has opened. The ones who have been waiting will not remain idle for long. Marcus nodded. We'll figure this out, but we need more time. And as the figure began to fade, its form flickering like a dying star, Marcus knew that time was indeed running out. Whatever happened next, their world was never going to be the same again. The entity's presence lingered in the room for what felt like an eternity, its glowing eyes now fading into nothingness. The air, once thick with tension and the overwhelming force of its power, began to feel lighter again, but the weight of what had just happened was far from gone. The glowing symbols on the walls still pulsed softly, as though echoing the entity's final words, urging them to make a choice they were far from ready to make. Marcus stood frozen, his mind spinning with the implications of what the entity had revealed. He felt like he was caught in a whirlwind, unable to grasp the full scale of what had been unleashed. They had opened something old and powerful, and now they were left to face the consequences. Lyra was the first to speak, breaking the silence that had fallen over the room. Her voice was sharp, impatient. We've wasted enough time, we know what we're dealing with. The artifact opened the door, and now we have to decide whether to let it stay open or shut it down before it's too late. Zara, who had been silent for a while, finally moved. Her eyes, usually calm and composed, were filled with an intensity that Marcus had never seen before. She approached the pedestal slowly, her hand outstretched as if reaching for the artifact, but she stopped just short of touching it. Her fingers hovered above the surface, trembling slightly. I don't think we fully understand what we've done, she said softly, her voice full of concern. The artifact isn't just a tool, it's part of something bigger, something we can't control. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he watched Zara. She had always been the calm one, the one who thought things through before making a decision. But now even she seemed uncertain. Lyra snorted in frustration. Control? We're beyond control at this point. You heard the entity. The gate is open. There's no going back now. We can either let it stay open and deal with whatever comes through, or we close it and risk losing everything we've just learned. Marcus glanced at both of them, his mind racing. Lyra's eagerness to act, to take control of the situation, was something he could understand. She was a warrior, used to making quick decisions and dealing with threats head-on. But Zara was right too. They didn't know enough about what they were dealing with. The stakes were too high to make a decision without fully understanding the consequences. You're both right, Marcus said, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. But we don't have enough information. We need to understand what's really at stake before we make a choice. Zara turned to face him, her expression softening slightly. Marcus is right. We can't just act impulsively. The entity said that if we open the gate fully, chaos will follow, but we don't know what that means. We need to be sure. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes burning with determination. Sure, you want to be sure. We're already in the middle of this mess. We're not going to get any clearer answers by sitting here and thinking about it. We need to take action. Marcus felt the tension rise again. Lyra's impatience was palpable, and he understood it more than he wanted to admit. But rushing into something they didn't fully understand would only lead to disaster. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts. What if there's another way? He asked. What if we don't have to choose between opening the gate fully or closing it forever? Zara looked thoughtful, as if considering his words. What do you mean? Marcus hesitated for a moment, unsure if his idea would make any sense. Maybe we can learn more about what the entity was talking about. Maybe we can understand its true purpose and find a way to control the artifact without unleashing the chaos it warned us about. Lyra raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. And how do you propose we do that? Marcus's mind raced as he thought through his idea. The entity had said the artifact was a conduit, a bridge. If that was true, then there had to be a way to learn more about it, to understand the connection it had opened without allowing it to consume everything. We can try to communicate with the entity again, Marcus said, his voice gaining confidence as the idea took shape. We've already opened the gate. What if we could learn more about what's on the other side? Maybe we can control the flow of energy, find a way to use it without letting it spiral out of control. Lyra's expression was hard to read, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or a hint of doubt. And you think it's going to just answer us like that? We have to try, Marcus said, his voice steady. We don't have many options left. If we don't do something, we'll have to face whatever comes through unprepared. Zara nodded slowly, her gaze distant as she considered Marcus's suggestion. It's risky, but it might be our only chance. If we can reach the entity again, maybe we can learn what it truly wants and what the consequences of our actions will be. Lyra crossed her arms over her chest, her expression still skeptical. Fine, but if this goes south, I'm not waiting around for the mess to clean itself up. With that, the three of them moved toward the artifact once more. Marcus could feel the pulse of energy in the room growing stronger, as if the artifact was aware of their presence, waiting for them to make their move. He took a deep breath and reached out to touch the surface of the pedestal. The moment his fingers made contact, the energy surged and the familiar, overwhelming presence of the entity filled the room. This time, the entity didn't appear in physical form, but its voice was clearer than ever, resonating in their minds. You have returned. Have you decided? Marcus felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him. We need to understand more. What is the true purpose of the artifact? Why did you choose us to open the gate? The entity's voice shifted, a deep rumble of ancient power. The artifact was created by my kind long before the fall. It is a tool of knowledge, but also a weapon. The gate is not merely a passage, it is a test. Only those who are worthy can control it. The chosen ones will have the power to shape the fate of the universe. Lyra stepped forward, her voice sharp. And what happens if we fail? If we're not worthy? Failure will lead to destruction. The power of the artifact will consume those who are unprepared, and the divide will grow wider, bringing chaos to the universe. But if you succeed, you will unlock the knowledge of the ages and wield the power to shape the future. Marcus felt a chill as the entity's words sank in. The weight of their decision was immense. The fate of everything was in their hands. We're not ready for this, Zara whispered, her voice heavy with the realization of what they were facing. Lyra's eyes burned with determination. We'll never be ready, but we can't let this power slip through our fingers. Marcus stood there, torn between the two of them. He could feel the power of the artifact pulsing in the room, like a living entity waiting for their decision. He didn't know if they could control it, if they could survive it, but one thing was certain. Whatever they chose, it would change everything. And with that, he made his decision. We'll control it, Marcus said, his voice firm. We won't let the power consume us, we'll use it wisely. The entity's voice filled the room again, this time with a sense of approval. You have chosen well. The gate will remain open, but the path is yours to walk. And with that, the artifact's light grew brighter, and Marcus, Zara, and Lyra stood together, knowing that the future was now in their hands.